House of the Dragon is HBO's prequel to Game of Thrones, but what do you need to know before watching? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover House of the Dragon in full, breakdowns, explanations and deep dives into the lore and history of George R.R. Martin's world. That's as well as other great fantasy worlds like The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. If you're new here, welcome. House of the Dragon is a prequel to Game of Thrones, set nearly 200 years earlier than the events of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's based around the Dance of the Dragons, a pivotal civil war in the history of Targaryen rule of the Seven Kingdoms. The story comes primarily from Fire and Blood, the history of the Targaryen rule in Westeros that George R.R. Martin published in 2018. So, yes, this is a complete story from George R.R. Martin. Yes, there are completely new showrunners handpicked by George R.R. Martin, and yes, he has been very involved in the process of adapting it to the screen, though he's not actually written any episodes so far. However, this does not mean that it is a standard page-to-screen adaptation. Fire and Blood is written as a limited perspective in-world history book, with often conflicting accounts of what happened, so the TV show has had to decide for itself which, if any, of those versions of events it wishes to go with. That said, this is your spoiler warning. At the time of writing this video, we've had one season of the show. I won't spoil the later plot lines there hugely, but there will be images from the show. I'll talk about the setup in the first few episodes, and I will mention a couple of things that happen in the book, so if you want to be 100% spoiler-free, proceed with caution. Okay, so let's get into the background. The show is set nearly 200 years before the events of A Game of Thrones, and Westeros is broadly as we might recognise it. King's Landing, Winterfell and Casterly Rock are all there, as are Targaryens, Starks and Lannisters. The Maesters, the Faith of the Seven, the Night's Watch and the Wall are all largely unchanged, though most of the action in this story will be around King's Landing, Dragonstone, the Riverlands and the southern part of Westeros. You'll notice some changes, though, to what we saw in Game of Thrones. The massive Great Sept of Baelor hasn't been built yet in King's Landing, but the equally huge Dragon Pit, which we saw briefly as a ruin towards the end of Game of Thrones the TV show, is in full use as, well, a dragon pit, a home for the dragons in King's Landing. Also, Dorne is an independent nation at this point, so don't expect to see much from them. But the biggest thing to be aware of in terms of the background is that this was when the Targaryens were in undisputed charge of the Seven Kingdoms. No one challenged them, and no one could challenge them. They were a large family, getting larger all the time, and most of them rode dragons. At the start of the Dance of the Dragons, there are 20 dragons alive of various sizes, and new eggs were hatching on a regular basis. So lots of dragons and lots of Targaryens. I'll pick up a bit on the family tree there in a moment because it's important, but if you are new to this part of Targaryen history, then the headline is that yes, there is still a lot of incesty intermarriage going on, and yes, they do all still have quite similar sounding names, but it's not that complicated once you get into it. There are also a couple of other houses that you should know about that will be new to TV show viewers, though probably not book people. House Velaryon and House Hightower. House Velaryon are another Valyrian house based on an island just off of Westeros, Driftmark in this case. Unlike the Targaryens, however, they weren't dragon riders back in Old Valyria. Instead, they have focused on sea power. The Velaryons are great sailors and have a large navy at their disposal. The closeness of the two houses has led to quite a few marriages between the two, and in the current story we have as patriarch and matriarch of House Velaryon, Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. A little more about her in a moment. Corlys is, by this stage, a living legend of Westeros. In his 70s, the wealthiest man in Westeros and the most far-travelled. His legendary 9 voyages took him across Planetos from the Shivering Seas to Asshai and back. One of the other spin-off shows being developed by HBO, now as an animated show, though still not officially green-lit as of yet, will be about him. Corlys and Rhaenys' children, Laena and Laenor, will also, small spoiler here, marry Targaryens in the build-up to the dance and ride dragons, so the two families are very close at this point, basically one large extended family. House Hightower are another old house, the oldest house in Westeros, in fact, having ruled over the city of Oldtown in the Reach for millennia. Until King's Landing grew under the Targaryens, Oldtown was the big city in Westeros, home to the Faith of the Seven, as well as the Citadel and the Maesters, and the Hightowers have close connections to both of those groups. Simply put, House Hightower are powerful and influential, though historically not as close to the Targaryens as the Velaryons. As this story starts, Otto Hightower is the hand of the king and has brought his daughter Alicent with him to King's Landing. We should also highlight House Strong as a house to be aware of. They aren't as powerful as those other two houses, but will play a central role in this drama. At the time of the dance, they are the Lords of Harrenhal, that massive but burned and broken castle in the centre of Westeros. Lord Lionel Strong is on the small council as Master of Laws, and his sons Harwin, strong by name and strong by nature, and Larys, the Master of Whisperers, are also in King's Landing. The Seven Kingdoms are broadly at peace. The long reign of old King Jaehaerys I has come to an end, and that did a lot to cement Targaryen rule and bring the Seven Kingdoms together. Now his grandson Viserys is king, and Targaryen rule is stronger than ever. No other family, or even combination of families, could even hope to challenge that many dragons. The only threat to Targaryen rule could be if they turned on each other. House of the Dragon is the story of that family turning on itself, first in family divisions, then in all-out civil war, dragging the whole continent into it. Imagine Game of Thrones, then add more Targaryens, more dragons, more deaths and more destruction. Which isn't to say that this is just about action and spectacle. Far from it. It all starts with a slow-brewing succession crisis. When Viserys inherits the throne at the start of Season 1, he has but one child, a daughter, Rhaenyra, who he steadfastly proclaims his heir. But what happens when he remarries and has a son and other children? Should the son inherit before the firstborn daughter? Some will think so, particularly given that Viserys himself only inherited the throne ahead of his cousin Rhaenys, the queen who never was, and her son, because she was a woman. Surely then Viserys' son should inherit ahead of his daughter, except he says no, and now he's king, he gets to decide. And so the arguments start. Season 1 is the story of how this difference of opinion starts to get personal. Divisions build at court, two sides start to take shape, and through it all, Viserys gets older and sicker and closer to death. What will happen when he dies? Season 1 actually takes place over a period of about a quarter of a century, with significant time jumps between some episodes, bringing changes in actor for some of the central roles, although from the end of the season going forwards, things will move forward at a much steadier pace. So let's briefly look at the key players on the two sides. The key players in this drama at the start of the story are Viserys himself, the king, and his daughter Rhaenyra. The hand of the king is Otto Hightower, who has brought his daughter Alicent to court. The relationship between these two young women, Rhaenyra and Alicent, will be crucial as the series develops. The show has deliberately aged up Rhaenyra to the same age as Alicent to emphasise this, and they start off close. Remember, all this is to do with the succession, the endless fight for the Iron Throne. Should Rhaenyra inherit, or someone else, someone male? As the show gets underway properly, the next in line would be Daemon, the king's younger brother, played by Matt Smith. Daemon will be at the centre of almost everything. This is how he is described in Fire and Blood. Over the centuries, House Targaryen has produced both great men and monsters. Prince Daemon was both. In his day, there was not a man so admired, so beloved, and so reviled in all Westeros. He was made of light and darkness in equal parts. To some, he was a hero. To others, the blackest of villains. Daemon Targaryen plays by his own rules, and where he goes, chaos often follows. We're supposed to be both fascinated and repulsed by him. And then there is House Velaryon. They are, to this point, effectively another part of the wider Targaryen family. Rhaenys, the queen who never was, carrying the scars of being overlooked herself decades earlier. Corlys, the living legend, and their two dragon-riding children, Laena and Laenor. The richest family with the biggest navy in Westeros. Who will they side with? And then there are the supporting cast, although few of them would view themselves as such. The talented and ambitious sons of House Strong, Larys and Harwyn. Mysaria, Daemon's mysterious Essozi lover. Criston Cole, the handsome and ferocious young knight. Tyland and Jason Lannister, the twins from Casterly Rock. And we know what the Lannisters are like. All these, and plenty more characters we will meet in later seasons, will join in the politicking, alliances, and eventually war of the Dance of the Dragons. Suffice it to say that there will be plenty of twists and turns and changes of alliance through Season 1 until the two sides finally take shape. And all this starts at the apex of Targaryen power. Never before or since were there so many Targaryens with so many dragons and such absolute power. But as we read in Fire and Blood, the seeds of war are oft planted during times of peace. The land under Jaehaerys I and then Viserys was peaceful and prosperous. Targaryen rule was unchallenged, but the cracks were already apparent. This is a story of political drama, personality clashes, and lots of grey characters that we can't really describe as heroes or villains. No one comes out of this well, and the biggest losers in the Civil War, other than the small folk who always suffer, are the Targaryen family themselves. This is a George R.R. Martin story, so expect gripping plot lines, dark and shocking twists, and a detailed and immersive world of dragons, drama, and death. I'll be covering House of the Dragon in full here on In Deep Geek. Episode breakdowns, deep dives into the history and lore of this world, and pre-show live streams to answer your questions on my second channel, IDG Live. There are links to all of those things appearing on your screen now. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.